Thank you very much for joining me here on stage. Honorable Minister Mustafa Garba, the Minister of Environment, Urban Safety and Sustainable Development in Niger. Ms. Ingrid Gabriela Hofen, Director General, Department of Global Issues at BMZ, and Mr. John Room, Senior Director, Climate Change, the World Bank. Let's give them an applause so they feel welcome. We hear the word urgency a lot, Minister, that this is climate urgency. We need to take action. There is a lot of focus on mitigation and investments for mitigation, but also adaptation is critical, not least for many developing countries. We now have the 1.5 degree report. Could you maybe provide some initial comments based on this report? How do you see the climate urgency playing out in your country, and what kind of action do you think would be essential to support your country moving forward? Please.
Merci beaucoup. Je vous remercie beaucoup, Monsieur le modérateur, Mesdames et Messieurs. Je voudrais rapidement profiter de cette opportunité pour saluer cette belle initiative donc, de la célébration du 10e anniversaire du CIF, qui permet de faire un pont sur la problématique du changement climatique. Évidemment, nous avions suivi les conclusions du rapport du groupe intergouvernemental sur les changements climatiques, qui a fait l'objet de très longs débats à Katowice lors de la 24e COP. Et la leçon que nous retenons, c'est qu'il y a urgence à agir. Il y a encore, hélas, beaucoup de leaders mondiaux qui doutent encore de la réalité des dangers que fait face à l'humanité quant à la perspective d'une hausse de la température liée essentiellement au mode et système de production actuel. De façon particulière pour l'Afrique, puisque vous avez parlé de mon pays, je parlerai globalement de l'Afrique subsaharienne et spécifiquement du Sahel. Même si l'objectif de la limitation de la hausse de température à l'échelle 2100 était limité à 2 degrés, cela signifierait sans doute 3 degrés ou plus pour l'Afrique. Or, nous sommes déjà, particulièrement pour la région sahélienne, dans une situation d'extrême vulnérabilité liée aux effets déjà visibles des changements climatiques, dans un contexte de grande aridité, dans un contexte de dépendance extrême de notre économie au secteur rural, l'agriculture, et les conséquences donc visibles déjà des changements climatiques, c'est la dégradation du capital de production, donc les ressources naturelles. Et naturellement, à l'horizon 2100, donc les objectifs de l'accord de Paris, et il y a lieu de dire, oui, qu'il y a urgence à agir. Et j'aimerais juste relever que rien que les engagements pris par nos États à travers l'accord de Paris, et pour la région sahélienne, se traduit par des besoins d'investissement de l'ordre de 400 milliards de dollars. Naturellement, un montant que nous n'avons pas pour le moment. Et pendant ce temps, le rapport du GIEC révèle qu'il nous faut être encore plus ambitieux, qu'il faut relever donc, le niveau des ambitions. Donc il y a lieu d'agir, certes au niveau de la mitigation, comme vous dites, au niveau des actions en matière d'atténuation. Nos pays font d'énormes efforts déjà, que ce soit au niveau de la lutte contre la désertification, de la gestion durable des terres et des eaux, et la promotion d'actions à co-bénéfice, la promotion des énergies renouvelables. L'exemple que nous avons vu ce matin, Nour, est un exemple très, très inspirant pour l'Afrique. Eh bien, il y a lieu de relever ces ambitions et par conséquent d'aller vers une plus grande justice climatique. Et là, c'est un appel aux autres parties de l'accord de Paris vers la promotion de plus en plus de systèmes plus innovants, plus justes pour, disons que, la gestion de cette situation pour laquelle tout le monde est responsable, mais où ces responsabilités doivent être plus que jamais différenciées. Pour l'instant, voilà le commentaire que je peux faire.
Thank you very much for that, and also for the very clear message about the particular stress, vulnerability that you have in the Sahel region, not just related to climate mitigation, but even more maybe to climate adaptation to variability and the huge investment needs that you really require in the future. Ms. Hofen, if I can maybe then turn to you. Again, climate action, the urgency is coming up, and this is, of course, a clear message from the IPCC, but also from the whole intergovernmental system and from negotiations also in Katowice. We need to push the agenda forward. BM said you are one of the important organizations, also supporting other countries. How do you then address this urgency, and how do you look at the agenda moving forward?
Thank you, Johan, and thank you. I would like to start by thanking especially the Moroccan government for having us here. The proof that Germany is present at this conference is also underlying the important partnership that we conduct with Morocco in the field of environment and in the energy sector. And I also would like to thank the World Bank for organizing this meeting. And finally, I would like to say to all of us, happy birthday.
Yes.
Happy birthday, CIF. And as Mafalda showed us, we have all together with joint efforts really make big progress and reach innovative areas we have never thought we could get there a couple of years ago. So for Germany, and if I speak as a representative of the Development Cooperation Ministry, we have changed our paradigm. The IPCC reports have clearly outlined there is no chance to achieve the SDGs by 2030 or thereafter if we don't actually change the course of action. And it has to be our action in societies, economies, in financial sector, has to be aligned completely with the goals and the metrics of the Paris Agreement. And we know that 2-degree warming is already entering into dangerous zones. We have seen the effects, especially in African countries. So there is a big, big urgency to come to a 1.5-degree world where we avoid tipping points that are irreversible. So for us in Germany, actually, these are like two sides of one coin. We won't get actually to the SDGs without actually implementing the Paris Agreement. On the other hand, if we don't actually implement the Paris Agreement in a way that we deal with equity issues, gender issues, indigenous people issues, we won't achieve the results in the transformation that is being needed. So this is like our framework under which we operate. It's not easy to get us there, but we're trying to be there.
Can you maybe just, I mean, I'll let you continue. Can you give one example, what's the main barrier for getting there? I mean, if you...
Perhaps I would like to bring one very recent example from Germany. For Germany to achieve its own domestic climate protection goals, we have to get out of coal. But still, 30% of electricity in Germany is produced on the basis of coal. In the sector itself, we have, you wouldn't say there are so many people depending on the coal industry, But these families and households are concentrated in a handful of regions. So this becomes really a big regional problem. But fortunately, and this is something that we have achieved over the last couple of months, and we started in August last year, when we decided to establish a commission on structural change, which we call the Coal Commission. And last Saturday, they achieved a compromise, which sets a goal that Germany is going to be out of coal at least, at the latest, in 2038, and hopefully even earlier. We are going to close plants, even lignite coal plants that are still very competitive in the next couple of years. So big action is going to be take place until 2023. And we are again going to start in a successive implementation of new reduction of coal electricity. In 2023, we are going to revise the goals and see whether they are still aligned with the overall climate action targets. In order to achieve this, the compromise was so important. We brought trade unions, the industry, government, NGOs like Greenpeace to a table, and they had to negotiate the compromise. And they presented it to the government last Saturday. Now the government has to provide, of course, the underpinnings in legal terms, and the government has to provide the financial support that is needed in order to really implement a transformation that is also a just transition for the workers in the coal industry. And this transition actually requires to invest into new areas, new technologies. We are going to actually locate new research institutions in those regions. We are going to invest in infrastructure, digitalization, in order to compensate for the losses in jobs in the coal mining industry. But at the end, and this was actually the reason why we could forge such a compromise, it became quite clear that Germany is at present locked into an energy, technology, coal that is not competitive in the medium or longer term. It's a waste of money to continue to invest in the sector instead of investing in new technologies that provide a better and cleaner future. So what I mean is that, of course, you have to try to bring in the two sides, the economic side, the social side, and invest into strategies that can forge consensus around the bigger transition.
Thank you for giving that example, because it's interesting to see how Germany, in many ways, reflects the situation and challenge we have in the world. So I'll let you continue.
So, of course, first, on the international arena, Germany would also like to continue to work with many, many partner countries that you can actually avoid this lock-in effect. And this extremely exciting plant here in Wasserrate is a proof that there are alternatives, especially in those countries that have actually the natural conditions to go into more innovative and more competitive technologies. And when the CIFs were created, actually, Germany thought that this is a very good investment for development cooperation, because we found that the CIFs actually provide us with a platform to forge this innovation that is needed and to build up the trust and the partnership and the financial engineering around the world to actually prove that this even can happen in developing countries. Because look back in the debate that people say, okay, this may be something perhaps for Norway or Switzerland or even Germany, but this is something really for Africa. And Wasserrate, I think, is a big proof. Yes, it is, and it is the future, and for many more countries. And you should, I mean, this would be my actually advice, and any country should avoid to get locked into fossil fuel, actually energy production that is not competitive over the longer term. To get us there, John, I think what is important is also what you said. There is a responsibility by the developed countries to provide the financial support that is needed for developing countries to transform their economies into a climate-friendly and climate-resilient future. So Germany has made a commitment that by 2020, we are going to have doubled our public finance to climate action, multilaterally and bilaterally. Last year, we spent already 3.65 million euros, and we have to get to 4 in 2020, so we're pretty close. One of our major engagements are with the CTFs and with the Green Climate Fund, and quite recently in Katowice, Germany has made a pledge that for the ongoing replenishment, we are going to double our contribution to up to 1.5 billion euros, sorry, billion, of course, euros for the next replenishment period. But additionally, I would like to pick up a point that the minister has made. We have to recognize that we have to do more on the adaptation side and the resilience side. Now, even those effects of climate change have reached developed countries. Germany was suffering from a severe drought, but certainly we have better means to protect ourselves against those impacts of extreme weather events. We have seen wildfires around the world with heavy also human losses. But for African countries, for instance, if you go from Ethiopia to Senegal, they are only seeing a big impact in their main crops, cocoa, coffee, and subsistence farming. And how are we going actually to deal with those impacts? Some are slower, others are more rapid and more extreme. And I think this is the one big target for Germany for the next couple of years, to work together with institutions like the World Bank, other bilateral partners like the UK, to actually to raise awareness about the need of more action on adaptation. And the Global Commission on Adaptation that has been established quite a couple of weeks ago, last October, will present to the UN Climate Summit a report that may highlight actually urgent action and describe the next work streams that we should actually embark on. And with the UK government and the World Bank, Germany has created a new facility to invest in climate risk finance, urgently needed to build up schemes that can protect country better than what is in place right now against extreme weather events, floods, droughts, or even slow onset events that harm agriculture productivity. And this new facility is one cornerstone of our action for the future. And these are, I think, partially, I'm not going to describe our whole portfolio. I simply wanted to highlight, if you look into the future, more financing is needed, more financial engineering as innovative as under the roof of the CTF is needed, and more investment in adaptation in partnership with developing countries is certainly needed. And I sincerely hope, and Ambassador Alba is with us here today, that jointly, again, the world community can really raise ambitious action at the UN Climate Summit on both sides, on CO2 mitigation, but also on adaptation.
Thank you very much. And really thank you for, I mean, both of you now have really stressed the fact that we have to increase focus on adaptation. We were stuck a little bit in what I would say a completely, illogical discussion before, that adaptation could to a certain extent almost threaten mitigation, because we need to focus on the mitigation. But of course, adaptation is key. It's no doubt. Moving to you, John, I know that the World Bank, and I know also your approach, is really to take this wider perspective on climate action. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and your reaction also to that, to the 1.5-degree report and climate urgency?
Excellent. Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. Great pleasure to be here. It's just fantastic driving in and actually seeing this plant operational. Well done to everybody. Great organizing this. Before I start, one thing that I think would be an interesting observation. I've been looking at notes. Obviously, we all prepare for these discussions, and we all write some notes. Now, listen to Ms. Bakuri, the ministers, Ingrid. Frankly, we could have shuffled our notes, and we could have all spoken off each other's notes. There is consensus on a number of issues. And I could go, again, I could explain to you why I have this button that's got the SDGs with 1.5 sitting inside it. Okay, Ingrid said it. We can't achieve our development objectives unless we address climate change. We know we're going to have 100 million more people living in poverty by 2030 if we don't address it. We're going to have 134 million more migrants by 2030. We know this stuff. The one spin I would put that hasn't been emphasized, I think, enough, is that there is also an upside. It's not just avoiding the downside of climate risks. New Climate Economy has shown that by 2030, there's $26 trillion of benefits that can come from low carbon, and 67 million incremental jobs by following that low carbon trajectory. So it's not just avoiding the risk, it's driving it forward. The second thing I think that we can pretty much agree on, when you look at the 1.5 degree report, business as usual will not cut it. Okay, this is not a question of simply finding a little bit more money to do what we've done in the past. And we can talk about, on the mitigation side, we've got to develop the new technologies. Here in Massen, CSP was driven further forward, but we've driven wind in Mexico. We've got to drive batteries. We've got to drive cooling. We've got to drive electric vehicles. And this will not take the old-fashioned methodology of finding a little bit more public money and arguing over whether we've got $50 billion or $55 billion or $100 billion. We need trillions of dollars to move. What does that mean? It's not just the finance. It means that we have to crowd in private sector money. We have to de-risk. We have to focus on this. And then on the other side, as Ingrid said, on adaptation, yes, we need to increase the focus on adaptation. But it's not simply saying we were going to develop in any case. We need to put a little bit more incremental money into avoiding the impacts of climate. No, we've got to go back to the drawing board and think differently about what development means. What kinds of agriculture do we need to invest in? Where do we need to put our roads? How do we need to develop our cities? All of these things, I think, need to come together. Third point I was making, if we are in agreement on these issues, and we're in agreement on the need for ambition, we now need to focus on action. Okay? It sounds corny, but that is what it is. Okay? And that comes from two pieces. One, I think we need some revitalized political commitment. And you mentioned Ambassador Alba. Yes, the UNSG summit in September should aim to do that. But frankly, political commitment is not enough by itself. We actually have to start delivering in the next 3 to 5 years to prove on the ground that we can drive battery storage, that we can drive floating solar, that we can do agriculture differently to get climate-smart agriculture. Because if we don't, countries are not going to have the confidence to come up with higher ambition NDCs. And so I think that really the focus should be on action. We can come back later to talk about what the MDBs are doing and what the CIF has done. But I think this is where we need to focus, on the real nitty-gritty of getting it done and spend less time just talking about the general things that we all actually agree on.
It's interesting that you bring up this issue of action, John. If I still can go back to you a little bit before we also talk about what the system is doing about this. You talked about political commitment. It's not enough. We need to prove, we need to show that it works. What are the barriers there? I mean, we quite often hear we have money, we have the technologies. Where are the barriers to really get action scaled up, you would argue? I know it's a difficult question, but key points.
So I think there are a few pieces to this. One is in investing in newer technologies, we need to more effectively bring together policymakers and different sources of finance to bring them together. The private sector cannot do everything by themselves. You often hear private sector says, if there's a deal, I would like to invest. The public sector says, well, maybe I need to think about the policy. We as MDBs, we can provide certain amounts of money. CTF can provide certain kinds of money. The idea would be to how can we identify 3 or 4 key transformative things and bring that financing and policy making together. That's one piece. Second thing is, at the country level, we need to go beyond the rhetoric to the reality of mainstreaming climate considerations into everything that governments do in terms of allocating money. We're still in the case with too many cases, climate is still seen as something that sits in the Ministry of Environment. We produce a plan that sits there. This has to become one of these central pieces for ministries of finance, ministries of planning, and heads of state to drive this in. If you have a look at the countries that are moving well and are moving quickly, this is what's happening. I think in many cases, it's not like action doesn't exist. There's lots of good practice. If we simply took the good practice that was there and replicated that more broadly, we'd be able to make a lot of progress.
Thank you. It's a very clear message there. Maybe I can turn to Minister Garba to comment a little bit on this in terms of bringing really action to the ground. Your Your portfolio is interesting. You are from the Ministry of Environment. As we heard, we need to engage also other ministries, of course, in this action. But you also have urban safety and sustainable development, so a broader agenda. How does it play out in Niger when it comes to climate action? Is it the whole government pushing for this, or do you still have a lot of different barriers that you have to overcome also internally to get more action and more investments?
Permettez-moi d'abord de revenir un peu sur la question des ambitions de l'Afrique. À travers l'accord de Paris, je pense qu'il y a eu pas mal d'évolutions pour entendre les cris de cœur de l'Afrique pour qu'il y ait un équilibre entre l'adaptation et l'atténuation. Je pense que beaucoup de gens sont conscients aujourd'hui, puisque pour les populations africaines, dans la majorité vulnérable, la problématique des changements climatiques se traduit aujourd'hui beaucoup plus à une question de survie, donc d'adaptation. Et en ce sens, il faut reconnaître que les Africains ont fait pas mal d'efforts. Dans mon pays, le Niger, nous avions très tôt compris la nécessité donc, de promouvoir des actions de résilience des populations. Ces actions ont pris une ampleur un peu plus significative depuis, disons, les 10 dernières années. C'est ainsi que, à partir de 2011, le pays, grâce à l'impulsion du président de la République actuellement, a engagé une vision dite initiative 3N, les Nigériens nourrissent les Nigériens. Comme je vous l'ai dit, nous sommes un pays essentiellement rural. L'agriculture, le secteur primaire de façon générale, occupe plus de 80% de la population et contribue à plus de 40% du produit intérieur brut. Dans un contexte de variabilité climatique très forte. Et à titre illustratif, une année de production agricole perdue nous coûte 2 points de PIB. Et cette extrême vulnérabilité a conduit donc les autorités à promouvoir cette politique dont l'objectif est de rendre les populations de plus en plus résilientes et de faire en sorte que les sécheresses de plus en plus fréquentes ne riment pas avec famine. Donc, renforcer la sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle des populations. Et en cela, il faut le dire ici, le CIF y contribue à travers le programme stratégique de résilience climatique qui finance un projet chez nous, le programme d'action communautaire pour la résilience climatique. Alors, la conséquence de cette prise de conscience, c'est que de plus en plus, la question climatique est traduite dans toutes nos politiques sectorielles et dans nos programmes de développement économique et social. Le programme de développement économique et social du Niger, qui est le cadre programmatique de référence, comporte un axe spécifique consacré aux questions de développement durable, avec 2 déclinaisons, l'une sur la gestion durable des terres, réseaux et de la diversité biologique, et l'amélioration du cadre de vie et la résilience donc, des populations. Donc au niveau national, il y a cette prise de conscience qui est là et qui se développe. Mais il faut admettre que les chocs et les externalités, et il y en a beaucoup qui pèsent beaucoup sur les capacités de réaction des autorités. Ainsi, s'il faut reconnaître que nous avons capitalisé beaucoup de pratiques à l'endroit des populations en termes de renforcement de leur capacité de résilience, nous faisons encore face à des chocs qui limitent l'action du gouvernement. C'est des chocs, en l'occurrence, sécuritaires, et pour lesquels, évidemment, le fardeau reste encore très lourd. Maintenant, il y a, à travers les défis relevés par le rapport du GIEC, une nécessaire solidarité qui doit s'instaurer entre les États, quand je parle dans les États, c'est tous les États partis à l'accord de Paris, mais particulièrement entre les États africains. Et à cet égard, il me plaît de rappeler que c'est tout près, à côté ici à Marrakech, en 2016, à l'occasion, 2017, 16, c'est ça, à l'occasion de la 22e conférence des partis, la Convention des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques, qu'a eu lieu le sommet africain de l'action, au cours duquel tous les chefs d'État africains avaient convenu d'agir désormais de façon coordonnée, de parler d'une seule voix pour l'action. Le sommet était appelé d'ailleurs Sommet africain de l'action. Et à cette occasion, plusieurs commissions régionales dédiées avaient été mises en place, dont la commission climat pour la région du Sahel, qui est présidée par le Niger. Et depuis lors, sous le leadership donc, du président de la commission, qui est le président de la République du Niger, son Excellence Ifou Mahamadou, un plan d'investissement climat dédié à toute la région climatique du Sahel, comportant 18 pays, a été lancé. Et il est apparu, comme je le disais tantôt, d'abord que nous avons été déjà très ambitieux à travers les CDN, nos contributions déterminées au niveau national, dont la traduction en termes d'investissement nécessaire demande plus de 400 milliards à l'horizon 2030. Pendant ce temps, la nécessité de rehausser l'ambition est apparue. Alors oui, les pays africains sont conscients d'être solidaires, d'agir pour lutter contre les émissions de gaz à effet de serre à l'origine du réchauffement climatique, mais également, plus que jamais, demandent plus de justice climatique afin d'engager davantage d'actions de résilience des populations. Et le rapport l'a démontré, ce n'est pas incompatible avec les ODD, ce n'est pas incompatible avec les objectifs des Nations Unies pour le développement. Et donc notre appel, c'est que nous allions vers cette plus grande justice, et face à cette volonté forte de l'Afrique, eh bien, nous entendons de l'autre côté, nous attendons qu'il y ait une volonté aussi importante, aussi grande, afin que chacun soit à même d'honorer ses engagements vis-à-vis de l'accord de Paris et de l'agenda climatique. Merci.
Thank you very much, Minister. I mean, this is a very clear message. What is interesting to a certain extent is the fact that climate change challenges now also bring countries together in collaborative efforts. You have also outlined the need for investments and also, of course, climate justice, equity, and so on. If I turn to you, Ingrid Gabriella, looking at the future a little bit, if we take that next step now in the final part here, what do you think, if you look 5-10 years ahead, BM said, the whole sort of bilateral system, what is it that you need to do as we move forward? What are critical points for you to try to shift the system and collaborate, of course, working together? Some reflections on that.
Yeah, perhaps I was considering like 4 main challenges that I foresee. The first one is actually, as this challenge is so big and the changes that we have to implement are so also very comprehensive, very new for many countries. The question is, how do we get there? How do we know actually how a country look like a climate-friendly, climate-resilient country in 2050? It doesn't suffice anymore to simply look ahead a 5-year period and say, what kind of investment do I need to get all children into school? If we invest into urbanization, we can have huge lock-in effects unless we know better what does it mean to make a specific city more resilient or actually more climate friendly. CO2 mitigation within cities is going to be a huge challenge. So the first challenge for all institutions, but development cooperation as well, that we have to get informed by longer term studies that give us a better assessment of what is needed to avoid lock-in effects by investments that we undertake today. So this long-term trajectory is key. And we haven't factored this in the past in normal traditional development cooperation or climate action. So the long-term perspective, first challenge. So we need more work on knowledge, assessment, and research to provide this knowledge to countries that take decisions and to policymakers on investments. The second challenge is whole of government approaches. As the minister and John have said, I mean, this has to be more than simply a combination of smaller action. And we know that there is a proliferation of institutions, actions, initiatives. So how do we make sure that actually on the ground in countries, we really can provide support that can be transformative at the end? So whole of government approaches are key. And in this respect, I would like to underline that the leadership has to come from the countryside, from the developing country or the developed country. At COP22, under the leadership of Morocco, we all together, many of the partners are sitting in this room, created the so-called NDC partnership, which provides a platform actually to bring together all kinds of sectors within the government, donors from the multilateral and bilateral sphere, and they sit together, bring in the private sector, and figure out what are the next steps to take. What kind of investment should take place because they are the most transformative ones in terms of economic benefits and climate action. And I think these types of platforms should be strengthened, bring together different actors, make sure that we act under very complex environments in a very comprehensive but also very coherent way. The third challenge is inclusiveness. If we really have learned that we can't transform economies and societies unless there is no one left behind, how do we get there? Do we have specific formats to debate transformation, to give room to voices at the local level, at the city level, at the national level? I mean, what we have learned over a while is that really this has to be a big investment. Unless we invest in inclusiveness and participatory formats, it will be even more difficult to come to the level of transformation and climate action ambition that is needed. And I think this is possibly not even relevant for developed countries, but also for developing countries. So we in the development cooperation community should in our action not only focus on finance or technological innovation, but also on the question, can we create this type of inclusiveness in our action that provides a certainty to societies that this transformation is doable and to the benefit? Because something is about that we know what science tells us, and we know about the reports of the new climate economy, but how do we get this across to people that don't read them? And they are much more influenced by the daily lives, the daily struggle for survival and to secure the livelihoods under very, very difficult circumstances. And I think we have to invest more and be a little bit more innovative in this respect as well. I think this is the lessons learned over the last 2 to 3 years, when we are now really experiencing also debate within societies and manifestations that shows us that it's not an easy take simply to get into a climate-friendly world by 2050.
And not least in Europe.
In Europe as well. I mean, these are lessons learned. And finally, and I would like to pick up the point that John raised on technological innovation. Of course, we have seen across the world a reduction in energy production cost of renewables. We have seen more confidence about wind power and CSPs and so forth. But are we really already there where we should be? And I would certainly see an urgency, really, to invest even more in new technological innovations. Unless we resolve the battery storage problems, there will be no chance, actually, to reach all the millions of people in Africa that have no access to modern and clean electricity off-grid, a smaller scale system, and that would provide jobs and actually and survive better livelihoods over longer term, unless we deal with the battery storage issues. For instance, how do we deal with power to X? Is this simply something that industrialized countries should now explore and pilot? I don't think so. I see many, many opportunities in many emerging economies, but additionally also in many developing countries. Should we wait to invest in the exploration of these new technologies until we are ready in industrial countries and the demand is there? No, I think we have to start to invest right now.
But the point is not just about the financial targets, it's how we use that money, because even those amounts are a drop in the ocean. And so we really need to be, as MDBs, using those resources that we have to drive the whole of government approach, to help people think more about longer term, to mainstream this into ministries, to think differently about adaptation, to drive technological innovation, to create the markets that will be necessary in the future. This is not just, well, what I say to our team, I could easily meet these investment targets by investing in run-of-the-mill photovoltaics. That's not our role. We need to move to this new generation. And the interesting thing is, as proud as I am of what we've done at the World Bank Group and of our future targets, I'm pretty sure that if any of the other MDBs, if Preeti was up here or Amelie was up here, IDB, ADB, will tell the same sorts of stories. So we're willing to be partners to drive this forward. Which then brings us to the CIFs. I think that the CIFs have actually been able to drive the MDBs to move this agenda forward. We've got tons and tons of examples that we'll talk about today. So if you think just about on the mitigation side, okay, we've talked a lot about NOAA, and that's great. But the CIFs also helped IDB and IFC get into the wind market in Mexico where nobody would touch it. Made a series of investments and policy changes to the point at which it crowded in $12 billion of finance, 75% of which is private, created 4.3 gigawatts of wind. Okay, in Madhya Pradesh, in India, the CTF came in together with the bank and produced the first solar plant that reached cost parity with coal. These are the kinds of breakthroughs that we can do and we need to do more of. Likewise, on adaptation, in Mozambique, yeah, we're working to help reconstruction of roads after the floods in Gaza. But what's more important than that, we're working on establishing road standards that will be resilient in the future and building this into the national planning system. That's the kind of impact we need. In Zambia, we're working to help farmers on the Zambezi switch from maize and sorghum, where you'll never be able to make a living and survive in a climate change world. Shift to higher order vegetables, fish, and then scale this up through the national program. Tajikistan is pioneering, with the support of the CIFs, a multi-sectoral adaptation program, and is trying to use some of the tools and techniques that we've used in energy efficiency to crowd in private financing. We can talk about FIP, we can talk about what the DGM has done about private inclusiveness. The point I'm making is that on each of these issues, we have proven examples that work. I think what we really need to do now is to figure out how we can take these further. So through the discussions, what have we learned, what works, and then more importantly, how do we scale that up? And I think the parting word that I would leave is exactly the question that Mafalda put on the table. If we believe that climate change is critical for development and growth, if we believe it's urgent, if we believe we need transformative change, if we believe that the CIF model, together with the MDBs, have developed, what the hell are we going to do next? Pardon the expletive. Okay? It's up to us to move forward. The world's going to look back to say, how do we take these lessons and incorporate them into the climate finance architecture to drive more of this agenda? And I would hope that over the discussions in the next 2 days, we might see some directions that are moving in that direction, so that over the coming 6 months, we can get a better clarity. And I'd love to get to the point at the UNSG summit in September where we can get a coalition that will come together and say, this is what a climate finance architecture would be needed, this is what it would look like, that will deliver on the ambition. It's not just about moving $100 billion. Yes, that's important for political reasons. But how do we have a climate finance architecture that can deliver on the ambition and the transformation that we need? And this is partly political, it's partly technical, it's public sector, it's private sector, it's rich countries, it's poor countries, and it needs to be based not on ideology, but based on what actually works. We don't have time to mess around over the next few years. This is the time where we have to deliver, and the world will be looking to us to deliver on this. So this is the challenge I have. Hopefully by the time we come to a closing plenary, we might have a few answers. Not all of them, but at least some ability to drive this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. I think everybody agrees that this was a perfect final statement. I don't need to say anything more. You're giving us a lesson, actually, for the next 2 days to work on. I mean, something to really come up with, taking us forward also for the final panel. An extraordinary panel here this morning, helping us to kick off the conference. Thank you so much to the three of you. A warm applause.